Hello, water managers and swims users. I'm Russell Errett. I'm with the Water Management Systems Division of the Hydrologic Engineering Center, and I'm covering the SWMS implementation, and we're using St. Louis as an example of how SWMS can be implemented within offices. This is a multi-part series, so if you want to see the previous parts to this presentation, see it in the playlist. So we have covered the St. Louis District overview, we've talked about how we view precipitation, how data is viewed and edited and validated, and then we've gone through modeling runs. We've used the Salt River Basin as an example of how SWMS has been implemented, and then we've started to cover how the Mississippi SWMS has been implemented within St. Louis. Now we're going to get into the actual application of SWMS within St. Louis District. We're going to show you some real-life examples of SWMS being used during flood events and kind of correlate SWMS modeling usage and decision-making to what's really going on in the real world. And then after that, in subsequent videos, we'll start talking about evaluations of how this performance of SWMS is compared to the legacy process. So flood fight and inundation mapping, doing just hydrograph forecasting, creating like a forecast for how high the reservoir is going to get or what the outflows are going to be, just developing a hydrograph itself for it. It's been something water managers have had to do since the dawn of time. Something that's relatively new in recent, the past 10 years is the expectation of inundation mapping. So not just how high does a river get, where does it go? Like how far out does it go? Now we're being asked to do something in a more three-dimensional, two-dimensional world, if you will, more than just a simple, how high as things go and where things are going to crest. So we're starting to be asked to do more as water managers. So this is an example of how we've utilized the SWMS modeling within the St. Louis District and produced inundation mapping and shown how that impacts the real world itself. So this is during the 2019 flood event, this is the inundation map that was created very early on in the event. And this is with 16 days of forecasted rainfall. So if all the 16 days materializes as expected, this is the inundation map we would expect. And so this is the upper Mississippi River coming down. The Salt River is over here on the far western side over here. As you can see, it's starting to come in, starting to look like an inland ocean here. And we're starting to go down to Mississippi here. And then we have the lower Illinois River here. And I will contend to this day, I'll gladly defend this, that this map is accurate based upon the conditions that existed at the time. And then the other parts of the presentation here, when I start going through a validation or an exercise to see the accuracy of the forecast, I will show you a point of a gauge that's down here in the lower Illinois River, and you'll see how accurate the hydrographs are. But what you'll notice is that there's a discrepancy between how accurate that forecast is versus spatially how accurate it is. The reason I say that is once you show this to flood fight individuals like the emergency operations, and eventually you should always assume as soon as it leaves your fingers, like this image leaves your fingers, it's no longer in control of you. It can be sent to anybody. Hopefully people are being responsible with it, but it will make its way out to a public view of somebody. And so when somebody sees this, if you're not familiar with this, you're not familiar with the Midwest, each one of these little red cells is an isolated levee by itself. So they're not like large, long-running levees, center lines, where if it fails at one spot, it's going to inundate the entire thing. There's kind of tributaries that come down off of the bluffs. So they're kind of like sleeve levees, if you will, or just they kind of compartmentalize into individual ones. So the thing I always, whenever I'm in person and do these presentations, to kind of describe what this is, what's the first thing that happens when you show this to the public. If you're familiar with the Midwest, just think about the 1993 flood or any large flood in the Midwest like Iowa and things. You always see a group of individuals out there sandbagging. So the first thing they start to see this is they start getting flood fight teams out there and they start raising levees. It becomes really wild. So I will show some images of what these look like. And what ended up materializing is a lot of these levees didn't actually overtop. Actually, none of these did, except for this lower one down here. And I will show some videos and some pictures of what this looked like. But they were able to effectively flood fight all of these to that level and avoid all this inundation that occurred on lower Illinois. As we get farther downstream, again, this is the Mississippi coming in. We start to get to the Mississippi-Illinois River confluence. It's kind of an inland ocean, if you will. This actually is very accurate. I don't think there's any of these levees that were flood fought effectively that were raised. This one I don't believe got flooded. So there's these three levees were held. And then this is as we get farther down the Mississippi, this is the Missouri River coming into the confluence. So this area did flood as it's predicted here. This levee did not, so there were some efforts here, some inaccuracies in the levee's lateral structure here, so that had to be raised during the events. If anyone's familiar with how this works, and I'll show some images and I'll come back to this, but changing lateral structures in real time can be arduous. If you're familiar with RAS modeling, this can be a very painstaking process. So I will say up front, to do this for the entire district, I was the one that was running this model, this was my full-time job. All I did was start calibrating the Mississippi River model and get to the point where, like, by noon, I was like, okay, I have a forecast. We're now generating inundation maps. And all afternoon, all my computer did was just crank out maps. And then what would happen is I'd try to publish these by 1, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and I'd start getting feedback from the field. Oh, this levee's not wet. This levee is wet, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then I'd have to make some corrections, and I'd run off and do some final runs that were just done very late in the evening on their own, and I would republish them. So this was a constant process throughout the flood event. So when we're talking about the flood fighting, we're talking about, like, when they raise them, we're not talking about just simple rows of sandbags that are like 6 inches high or a foot high. They are raising levees out here by feet. So this is what they call flashboarding. So these are pieces of plywood. So we're basically raising levees by like 4 feet. Like, they're significantly high. So they're raising an entire levee system by 4 feet for a very length of it. And so this is a picture of an effective flashboarding. So it held back all the water. So this is the Illinois River on the side over here, or the Illinois River over here to the right. This is the levee that's being protected from the Illinois River. So they effectively flood fought this one. And so this obviously is the reason why I tell you that the inundation map is not showing water in there. If they did not flood fought this, it would have gone in here and it would have been wet. This is an area down by the confluence of the Missouri and Mississippi. And you can see this is, again, I'm in an office. I don't have purview to this areas out here. I don't get to go walk out and do this and then come back in and do forecasting. I'm just told they are flashboarding. So I was told that this levee was flashboarded and this levee is flashboarded. Obviously, flood fight efforts aren't equal, right? So this one clearly is not as well flood fought as this one is. So when you're told this, I'm raising lateral structures in a RAS model the same way both ways until somebody tells me it's not working anymore. And now I have to remove the flashboarding in there so that it starts inundating these areas. And so you can see the effectiveness here. It's like starting to under seepage through here. And so you can start to see that the two efforts are just not the same, but the description you're getting in an office is described the same. And you're expected to produce an accurate inundation map along with your forecast that you're expected to do. So this is more pictures of the same type of flood fighting. So this is the flashboarding. To this day, I'm really not 100% positive which side the river side is on this one and where the protected area is at on this one. But this is flashboarding. That was described to me the same way as everywhere else. But you can see that obviously this one's not working out very well. And so I just threw some other pictures on here. Like, this is obviously a flood wall here in St. Louis. This one's probably one that if it was going to be overtopping, I would know about it. I can actually walk down and go see it because this is where I'd be working. So this is one of those flood projects where I'm not too concerned with it. As you get to some other areas, they are sandbagging roads. You can see there's 2 rows, maybe even 3 rows of sandbags all along a road, and now it's starting to overtop. And then obviously even just a flood wall, they're even putting flashboard across a flood wall in some of these local areas. So it gets to be pretty interesting where you have a clear concrete section where you wouldn't expect it to be raised. They're raising it just to try to get a couple of extra inches. So this is one of those where it would have overtopped parts of this flood wall, and they raised it by doing flashboarding. So these are things that to get this information, you can't find this by sitting in an office, in a water management office on your own, not talking to anybody. You have got to have great communication with all of the people that are involved with this. So what I have always done when I was doing water management operations is this moment flood operations start, I walk over to EOC with a clipboard and literally handwriting, okay, which levees are all the way fixed from the last flood? What are the overtopping stages that you're expecting? What's the flood fight status of these things? And I would make notes of all these so that when I went back to my modeling, I had notes of where these things were going on. I was aware that there was flashboarding going on these things. I was aware that there's flashboarding going on these, that they were going to sandbag these roads. And then I would start asking more details. Hey, I'm doing modeling. I'm seeing that there's going to be water coming up on these sandbags. Is that what they're seeing in the field? Are they overtopping? Things of that nature. So I start getting a more accurate inundation map produced. Also just the hydrographs, just let them know that. So it becomes very arduous. So you can imagine this is why this is a full-time job, somebody to do this for like Mississippi. Somebody's just been in their full-time waking moment throughout a flood trying to make sure they're producing an inundation map very accurately. And So other things that happen, when levees start to get overtopped, they start to breach. So when, for example, here they have flood fought through here and the exceeds the flood fight efforts that's going on here, and it breaches this levee. So in real time, when I start to see these things, I can start to see them show up on hydrographs of the actual stream gauges. And when I talk to the field, they're like, oh, there's a breach. I'm like, okay, can you tell me how wide it is? When did it happen? Any information I can get, I will try to use to put into my RAS model to predict that breach propagation. So sometimes it's just from the news. This is a drone footage I think that was captured, and I saw it on the news, and I was like, okay, well, I think somebody reported it overtopping or breaching somewhere around daylight. They noticed that it was done. So I was assume around 6 a.m. before daylight, it started the breach, and this is probably somewhere around 11 o'clock. This is what the propagation was, and I can start to put something into a RAS model very quickly. A lot of times, I think having some notes on what the parameters are to put into a breach parameter for a RAS model is probably good to have up front. I did go to some of the hydraulic sections. I'm like, hey, I'm expecting some breaches to happen. Can you help me with the parameterization of these things? Give me some default things, some things to start with, and then I can tweak from there. So I did do that beforehand. So these are just kind of calibration points as I see them. Again, this is up near Winfield, Lockingham 25 on the Mississippi. This kind of looks like an inland ocean. So these, if you were to look at our RAS model, you can see these kind of treetops or vegetation sticking out of the water. Think about these as little individual storage areas, like 1D storage areas in that RAS model. So all of those are going to be completely wet and completely saturated. So as I'm calibrating my model, I can see like the rivers over here. I should expect, the water surface elevation across here to be about the same as it is on the main stem river. So again, these are kind of photos I'm getting from the field to help validate what I'm producing in my model, things that you would want to do to make sure you get an accurate inundation map. Again, that lower Illinois, all those levees were flood fought. And so it got to a point where like the lower, I think 3 levees were basically like, we're evacuating everybody. And it's just a waiting game because they're like, the river's going to rise to a point where it's going to exceed the flood protection on the lower 3. We don't know which one's going to get exceeded first, but whichever one gets exceeded, it's going to be the one that breaches. And so this happened to happen. We saw on the gauge, it dropped off. I'm like, okay, which levee breached? It was the first thing I did in the morning. And they're like, well, I think it's the lowest one. I'm like, okay, cool. I know which levee it is. I'm like, can you tell me where it breached? And it's really hard to get information out of the Illinois River because there's not really good cell reception up there. But I got this grainy photo, and they're like, oh, here's a picture of it. I'm like, well, I don't know where this is at. So I spent 30 minutes reverse engineering where this bluff is here relative to this, trying to figure out exactly what that bluff is at on the topo map, and trying to figure out where that's at. And they kind of took a rough guess. I'm like, I think it's on the lower end of that levee, and just kind of went with it. And I can kind of estimate how wide I think that was and when it was taken. So kind of a rough thing. This is a really important thing because it was pulling water out of the river, like that really was dropping the river, and it's really affecting all my forecast points downstream. So I really needed to get this breach point to understand when the rebound was going to happen. So this is one of those isolated cells. It's going to fill in, and it's going to start to, rebound on the main stem river. So unbeknownst to me, the general was flying around with our public affairs person right over the top of it when I was trying to figure this out on my own. And so this is a picture from the helicopter they flew across, and I didn't get this for another couple of days, which I found kind of humorous. But I'll show you a video of this. So you can see the propagation of the breach scour occurring here. It's a massive scour that ended up materializing here. And so again, in the same sense, the FEMA on the ground, Illinois FEMA, wanted to know, okay, I need to know when this area is going to drain. So I was creating animations of it propagating into the levee, filling it up, and then I was showing an animation for over 3 weeks as it drained out to kind of predict when the roads would open back up, so where they can start to assess when they can fill this and start repairing this breach. So there's questions being asked even while the breach is still occurring that I was able to produce for those inundation maps. And so as we get farther downstream, this is downstream of St. Louis. This is on the main stem Mississippi. We're getting down towards Cape Girardeau, Missouri. You can see all these levees here are showing completely dry. And technically, the river never flooded any of these rivers or these levees here. So these all did stay dry all the way through the flood event. However, I did get a complaint from the public when we were presenting this that they had gotten this from some of the flood fight engineers. They said this map for definitely this lower levee down by Cape Girardeau is one of the most inaccurate inundation maps and is not helpful at all. I was like, really? I'm like, it didn't flood in there? Like, yeah, but it also don't have a pump station on this. And so basically 120 days, I think they're above flood stage. And I think they were probably flooding for roughly, I don't know, 30, 40 days up to the crest of the event. All the rainfall from this bluff came into this leveed area and just filled up because they didn't have a way to get out of it. And so for effectively most of this leveed area was underwater, and they were boating in and out of their house to get to and from there. And it wasn't flooding from the river, it was flooding from the local drainage. And it's like, well, that's not at all the way our models are designed. I wasn't designed to like predict the interior drainage. It was predicted to produce inundation maps for the river. So since this flood, the HMS model has been redone and redesigned, and it's been relinked to the RAS model to help predict some of the interior drainage based upon that information. I'm like, well, that is some information I probably need to know, because some things that were being asked during the event were like, how many pumps do we need to pump this area out? I was like, I have no idea. I don't even know how much water is in there. So even during the event, even though your models are performing the way that you would think they're designed, there's still questions that are unanswerable with these. So it's kind of almost an impossible task. So if you have any questions about our software, need some help, looking for some additional training, check out these links. And then if you see any descriptions below for any additional details, thank you for your time.